Thanks everybody for coming. This is going to be a compact version of a longer talk. If you want to look on PBC's website, you can find that. But unlike the first two presentations were all about nuts and bolts, this is about nuts and bolts in a much bigger, broader scheme. And it's meant to give you some thoughts to take home, nothing to actually take and screw down tight, okay? So I'm going to try to frame this talk in giving you a different understanding of the built environment. You know, I feel like as an elder of this community, I've been doing some real out there experimentation, thought experiments, and these things have inspired me to really push well beyond whatever I thought I could be when I was just a design builder and doing passive houses. So I'm going to have to get through in 20 minutes, so I'm just going to jump right in and give you guys the whole thing here, okay, as much as I can. Let's see if I can get this thing to work. Am I doing this right? Yes, okay. So there's something that goes on with all of us, and that's, you know, we all are facing this dilemma of existential crisis, right? We're looking at the world around us and seeing this big magnitude of fucktitude that we're facing, and we're going, how the heck can we deal with it, right? And we look at ourselves and we're on this continuum, and the continuum goes from I on this side to we on that side, right? And it's like I over here is, you know what, pure Donald Trump, and we over here is Mother Teresa or Gandhi, or I don't know what it is, but we try to sit on this continuum in the middle somewhere, right? And we're constantly trying to balance head and heart. And as we all look around us and see what's going on in the world, it gets harder and harder and harder and harder to deny this existential craziness that's going around me. And we're all professionals and we're all individuals, and we all have relationships both with ourselves and our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandparents, and we're all trying to figure out, what do we do, right? And these are the kind of questions that I've been wrestling with for quite a few years. This slide came from 2012 at a Passive House conference in Vermont that I gave, where I was talking about evolution and de-evolution, that, you know, society doesn't only move in one direction, it goes ebbs and flows, back and forward. Evolution is the gradual development, kind of walking forward without thinking, and de-evolution is the kind of sudden reversal, and we're seeing that all over the world right now. But there's another way to handle it, and it's called re-evolution, and that's sustained evolution with intention. Now, when I wrote this back in 2012, I had no idea what I really meant by it, except for that we could look back in the past and make a better future. And it wasn't until 2018 when I was accepted into the Edmund Hillary Fellowship in New Zealand as one of their 550 fellows that are making change. Did I begin to open my mind, and was my mind even begin to pry it open to this thing I was talking about? And a lot of this came with the, you know, when I went to New Zealand, I was not knowing what I would find there, and so I was totally open. And when I went there, I thought they would be giving us PowerPoints and telling us what we were doing and giving us, you know, no, it wasn't like that. They brought us there, and for the first day and a half, all we did was spend time with 3 Maori elders, who just kind of welcomed us to the community and gave us a little bit of grounding and were with us for the whole 10 days. And, you know, the Jewish guy from Washington, D.C., never knew any indigenous, and I had no experience with this, completely like blown away by it. But what happened was these folks and the folk, they just started opening my mind and my heart in a way that I hadn't known. And what I started realizing was that there's kind of if you will, a frequency with which we all vibrate, which the universe vibrates, which we don't oftentimes slow down enough to actually feel. But within ourselves, we have dissonance that we create, right? If we have like a core value that we hold, whatever these core values might be, well, if you can hold that core value with yourself, that's great, right? If you can hold that core value with your partner, that's great. But how often can you continue holding that core value as the echo goes farther and farther and farther, right? And we all argue and deal with the dissonance that happens as we start moving up and up and up as the waves of our being starts translate. So how do we deal with this? How do we start to align the values of our core, live with ourselves, knowing the magnitude of what we're facing, and try to be full enough in our own personal cups to be able to be overflowing so that we can overflow onto the different levels. I can overflow myself because I'm full. I can help my partner. Now I can help my next ring. So how do we do that, right? And when I was in EHF, it became, I had a real awakening in that the idea of a like I sing in a choir, the idea of a song, right, or a tune. And when I was standing there was 45 people in my cohort, and only 2 of us did anything related to housing, right? But it was like, if I'm singing so I'm singing whoa, that note right there, and I sing it, and I'm dealing with housing. But if my cohort mate sings that with me, we can raise the amplitude of that, right? We can raise the amplitude of our work by working together. But then what happened with this EHF thing that was so mind-blowing was it wasn't just, there was only a couple of people there that were doing like building. Everybody else was into things like social enterprise or Bitcoin holograph. I mean, just like way out there stuff like oceans, like preparing storytellers doing stories about oceans and just amazing stuff. And most of the people were like in their 20s and 30s. And I'm an old guy walking along going, God, what's going on here? But as we talked, what we realized was it wasn't just about finding the other people that align with your exact silo that you're in, but finding people that resonate with that silo and that are doing similar work or related work or work that can be intersectional with the work that we're doing. So the people that are doing social enterprise or distributed autonomous organizations, how do we incorporate that into the housing and building that we're doing? Or people that are starting to think about how do we create gift economies or economies of abundance? How do we start to do that in a way that starts to empower small groups of people? I mean, there's all kinds of levels of harmonious possibilities when you start trying to put the convergence of your sine waves together. And so what happens as you start to build up these kind of cool patterns is that if you're able to maintain alignment from the beginning, you're able to start getting very intersectional with your thinking. So I've been thinking about housing specifically. And when I'm talking about housing, I'm not just, like passive house, net zero, zero embodied, low embodied, that's all like basic, right? That's all written into the program. That's not even what I'm talking, this is like well beyond that. So, so what I'm talking about is trying to figure out this is what we're living in, right? In our minds today, this dissonance, right? My work doesn't satisfy my inner life goals. I can't get my kids to get off their computer, whatever those dissonance that we all live with. And how do we get into a harmonious mode? Well, for me, it became a process of living in a different world. And I started a process of trying to figure out what kind of world would I even want to live in. And this was a mind-blowing idea. And what happened was I realized that this kind of world that I see, there would be 3 kind of basics to it. And everything that I was trying to envision was based around healing. All right, so regeneration or healing, and if you want, and the reason I say healing is because I need a tether to. Like that regeneration is like green; it doesn't mean anything, right? For me, if you can bring it back to healing of self or healing of relationship, healing of place, anything healing, that's an easy concept, right? So that if you hear that, that's what you should think. When I say abundance, that's an economy based on abundance rather than scarcity. We in the West, we as settlers, live in an economy based on scarcity. That's what our entire economic model is built around, and that's not a model that's going to get us forward from the petri dish that we live in with the scale of the population that we have. So part of our learning as settlers is to understand not that the concept of abundance doesn't mean that everybody gets a cold toilet bowl. It means that there's enough. It means that what does the concept of enough mean, right? And once you start to understand how enough works and how enough works with a healing atmosphere, you start to get into a completely different view of what housing means, right? And the last piece is a piece that's really dear to me, which is kindness. And I don't mean kindness like, in love. Aloha is actually Maori for love. But it's kindness in the kind of kindness that was envisioned by Martin Luther King in the beloved community. Right? It's the kindness of empathy and compassion for each of us seeing within each other ourselves and within ourselves each other. right? And so this is the guiding path. And through this guiding path, I started realizing some stuff. Like, in a regenerative economy, there'd be no hoarding of intellectual property. There'd be a highly decommodified housing. You would no more be able to own a piece of land in a regenerative economy than a tree or a cow can own a piece of land in our Western thinking, right? In a regenerative economy, housing would be a nest and not a nest egg, right? Because your nest egg is your community. It's the regenerative society which was built over hundreds of years of regenerative thinking, not like we're going to turn it on a dime. Now, how much time do I have, Ed?
10 more minutes.
10 more minutes. Okay, I'm going to really try to go fast because I'm cramming a lot of stuff in here. So there's a whole process of learning that has to come within us as Canadians, which we've started and embarked on with Truth and Reconciliation. Has to do with decolonization, understanding what colonization has brought to us. And the way that I've explored that is I imagined a thought experiment where I said, what happened if the indigenous diseases of Europe were deadly, were not brought to the Americas and then spread, and 70–80% of the Americas just died from disease before we even got to colonization. What if those diseases were endemic in the Americas and they were passed to Europe? So from between 15 and 1600, by 1600, 70% of Europe's dead. Right? How might the world have changed? It's a completely theoretical exercise. As a builder, it took me 9 months of walking around arguing with myself, telling me, you're not doing anything. Yes, I'm thinking. No, you're not doing anything. What are you producing? Thoughts. It's nothing. It took me 9 months of that through COVID, trying to figure out, like, it's okay to just think, especially when you're retired. And so I imagine the world as a loom. History is like pictures and colors and patterns, and I just unstitched history and then restitched it based on the history of the Haudenosaunee, because that was the people of the land here. And I've come up with some really incredible stuff I'd love to talk to you about, but I don't have time. I suggest you read all these books and as many more as you possibly can. As Canadians, I think we should be saying, you know what, we need to read real history right now, like a book every month at least. If you get a chance, go take her class. She's in Toronto here. Her name is DM La Fortune, and she will rock your world. When I'm talking about regenerative economics, and I know you guys are like, I'm just talking way out here compared to what you thought about, but regenerative economics is a way of thinking, and I'm trying to give you a way in that's really simple, right? So braiding sweetgrass, anybody here read Braiding Sweetgrass? A few people? Great. This is a great kind of break in the Western mind to somewhat of the indigenous mind, crossover with science, and you've got an indigenous botanist who starts to really can really gently give you ideas about different ways of thinking about life and economy. Then, if you want to get into something that's really exciting, Charles Eisenstein, Sacred Economics, talking about abundance and gift economy. This stuff is like heavy duty reading, but I mean, it took me months to get through it, and it's heavily noted, but probably the most deep thought as to how this could work in big pictures. Oops, what did I do there? The next thing, Doughnut Economics. Anybody read this? Know about this? Rob has. Definitely a book to be read. It's looking at economics not through the lens of forever abundance and just like the earth is infinite and we get everything, but recognizing where those boundaries are. And then lastly, I don't have the book up here, I guess, is Values by Mark Carney, who was the Bank of Canada president, and he actually did an amazing, and Rob was the one that turned me on to that book, but he did an amazing job of really taking the context of the global economy and putting it into an intellectual kind of framework that starts to make sense about how we need to balance values and need. Now, this is my visual description of what Doughnut Economics means, right? And so very quickly, I'm going to try to give you this concept. So what you've got is this ecological ceiling, this yellow line around here. That's as much as we can put in the Petri dish. There's this green space, which is the safe and just space for humanity, which is where the regenerative and distributive economy can actually happen. That's where profit can happen, right? But then within the center of the donut is the social foundation. This is where our re-evolution happens. This is where we have to rethink that before we ever get to the profit, we have to fill this, right? And what happens is all these various tipping points around the edges are overshoot. And right now, most of us are living way out here, right? So this is already kind of well beyond where we are. But if we don't think this way, we're not going to make any change. And I specifically have been focused since 2018 on housing. Oops, am I going backwards? Oh, there's Mark Carney. He popped up there. All right. So what I've been doing is saying, okay, well, I take all these like super high level ideas, and that's this, right? And that's the architect in me. But I'm a builder at heart. That's what I've always done. So I want to know, how can I make it real, right? So what can I do to take these crazy ideas and make them real, right? So the first thing is to start understanding that when we're talking about the kind of change that we're facing with the edge of the petri dish, we're talking about systems change. We're not going to change just tweaking about the edges. We're not going to change just by developing the green belt. We're not going to change just by giving more subsidies to for-profit developers to build more affordable housing. It just ain't going to work. We've got to rethink the way that we relate to land, rethink how we relate to commodification. Because what's going to happen? Well, they're going to go down there, going to build 4 houses on a lot, and then they're going to have four $1 million houses instead of one $1 million house, right? And who's going to afford those $1 million houses, right? It's like densification. You have to come with a different concept, and that's where we have to decommodify the land and separate land and building. That's a longer conversation we won't talk about. Intersectionality. This is where we as regenerative practitioners have to start really thinking bigger and bigger and bigger. Bill Reed, who is kind of the guy who introduced me to this way of thinking, once told me, if you're having trouble with the problem, make it bigger, right? So I just give you a real quick kind of scenario of how that worked for me. So systems thinking. So so I had invented this component panel system for building buildings. It worked great, and my concept was that we had produced all the parts in ArchiCAD and AutoCAD and Revit and everything, and people would use them and send them to us, and it worked great. But the idea was to try to convince other pre-manufacturers to also have databases they could share in this library so that we could mix and match parts. Well, I never was able to convince anybody in the States to do that. So in 2017, I got invited to Christchurch to talk to Prefab New Zealand and pitch all the big players in New Zealand on this pre-competitive platform concept. And I was there, and there was an Australian professor there, and we just pitched it. And they loved it in the room, and nobody wanted to deal with any kind of competition or, it's like NDAs don't exist in a regenerative world. They don't, because that's scarcity, right? They just don't happen that way, right? When you, Josie, who your presentation was freaking awesome, by the way, but when you go in, do you ever sign an NDA with an architect before you build? No, right? Because we're all going to figure this out together, right? So what happened was in 2018, after that first kind of idea, we went and tried to expand this and tried to expand it out to even more bigger components, to things like bathroom components besides just wall and floor and roof components. Once again, we went with the Pam, who ran Prefab New Zealand, was really into it. We tried to leverage, and we just couldn't get it off the ground. So we took that. I said, okay, well, I got to make it bigger. And so we started some Robs in it. It's called the Human Nest Atelier, and we've got prefab manufacturers from all over the world. I mean, we've from New Zealand, Australia, where, Rob? Like Norway, Canada, US. I can't remember all the other, there's other places like, there was a guy from Ukraine, but he's no longer with us. No, I mean, he's still alive. He's just not in our group anymore. And I can't remember the other ones. Anyway, so we had this atelier, and what we were doing was we were telling anybody that wanted, we were acting as like a board of wise people for young people who were trying to start up in the field, and we were counseling people. But after about a year, we just couldn't get enough interest in it. So I was like, okay, now we make it bigger. So we got a chance, and Rob came along with me. Rob, you've been on all of these journeys with me, I tell you. We went to Toronto Community Housing and pitched them even a better idea about creating a pre-competitive platform that allows them to train small groups of builders to go out and renovate these small. They have 5 million. They got zillions of little low-rise 2- and 3-story wood frame stuff that are all different. And anybody that's renovated these things and they want to make them into passive house knows you just got to get on site with the stuff and start sticking on and solving problems. And so we tried to come around it from the back end and create a no bid procurement system where they would actually have people in house that would do the installation, create the panels, Anyway, we were told we could do that for about a year until finally the real procurement people came in and said, no, you can't do that. So that went, okay, so that was like last year. And so just in the last year and a half now, Ngāti Toa, which is an iwi or a tribe or a group of Māori in New Zealand, the New Zealand society is light years ahead of us in terms of reconciliation. They've been working on it as really with their heart since the 70s, and a lot of the iwi have gotten settlements, and not the kind of stuff that we do here where we treat indigenous people like little babies and then we still control everything. No, this is yours, and it's completely yours to control and to take forward and to do whatever you want with it. We're not going to treat you like little kids, like you're not responsible. And these are all the things that you're actually do in the future when you're ready. And the cool thing is, because of the mindsets of the Ngāti Toa, they've always owned land communally. So in one sense, New Zealand is already light years ahead of us because they already have built into their regulations what's called whānau land or common land. Some of this land is owned by 500, 600, 700 individuals, right? And this is all, and so they already have infrastructure for owning land together. They also have infrastructure for financing just house versus land. And so Ngāti Toa is this one group that's made their settlement, and they're trying to now come up with a 500-year plan. And one of the biggest things they're looking at is housing. And I am like a tiny, tiny little fly on the wall, and I'm just incredibly grateful to be in the room and listening to them talk, because all I'm doing is helping them with a little bit of component construction. They're basically taking some of the ideas I had with Built Smart, and they're doing the same kind of standardized components, but to a New Zealand context. But the cool thing is, they've got the whole regenerative picture. Like, they've got a vertical integration all the way top to bottom. They've got financing. You pay 2% of the value of the land for 99 years. Right? You can't, you only, your house, when you buy your house, when you sell it, you can only sell it for the cost of the increase in construction costs between here and here, right? And it has nothing to do with the value of the land, right? So the concept of this is like, what? We don't get it. We're Westerners. How can that be? That's our nest egg. That's my retirement. No, the retirement is the community. The retirement is the whānau. The retirement is their diaspora of 70,000 people that they're trying to bring back to their homelands. Right, so their way of thinking of housing is so much closer to what that regenerative view of housing that I've been working on for years and years and years, that I am just grateful to be able to sit in, talk to them a little bit about that, and then ask them tons of questions like, how are you doing? How are you actually financing this? How are you doing this legally within the construction? How are the permits getting made? So, you know, the idea of expanding the thought, Bill was right. The bigger the thought, sometimes the thought's just too big to get it to a smaller scale, right? And I'm just, hopefully 10 years from now, Ngāti Toa will be an example of something that's working. So I hope that gave you a tiny bit of a clue of what I've been working on and gave you a little bit of inspiration of how it may apply in your life. And I wish you all the best with that.